Imagine being barely 18 years old, told on a Sunday evening that in 12 hours you will be beheaded, and your response is to ask for the executioner's block to be brought to your cell so you can practice laying your head on it for hours in the darkness. Imagine rehearsing your own death over and over, adjusting your neck position, testing different angles, trying to perfect the one thing you can control in a situation where everything else has been taken from you. Imagine being so terrified of dying badly that you spend your final night alive making sure you die well. But the block was not the worst part. The rehearsal was not the worst part. What happened in the months before Catherine Howard faced the executioner was a slow-motion destruction of a teenage girl who had already survived more trauma than most people endure in a lifetime. You were told this was romance. You were told the king loved you. You were told you would be safe. And then, when men from your past came forward with stories, when letters were discovered, when the interrogations began, you realized the truth. You were never safe. You were evidence. Before we go deeper into Catherine's story, if you want more hidden histories they tried to bury forever, subscribe now and hit the bell. Because once you hear what happened to 18-year-old Catherine Howard in the months before her execution, you will never see Tudor England the same way again. And when you reach the moment that disturbs you most, and you will tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what shocked you the most. The year was 1541. Autumn had turned cold in England, and Catherine Howard, Queen of England for just 16 months, was about to learn that the past does not stay buried. The year was 1541, and Catherine Howard had been Queen of England for barely 16 months when her world began to collapse. She had married Henry VIII in July 1540, just weeks after his humiliating annulment from Anne of Cleves. Catherine was somewhere between 17 and 19 years old. Henry was 49, obese, suffering from oozing leg ulcers, and increasingly paranoid. He called her his rose without a thorn. He showered her with jewels, gowns, estates. He paraded her through the court like a prize. But Catherine was not a prize. She was a target, and the men who knew her past were already sharpening their knives. Catherine Howard was born around 1523 into the powerful Howard family, but her branch had no money. Her father, Edmund Howard, was a younger son who squandered what little he had. When Catherine's mother died around 1528, the family was broken apart. Catherine, barely 8 years old, was sent to live with her step-grandmother, Agnes Howard, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. The Duchess ran large households at Chesworth House and Norfolk House in Lambeth. Dozens of wards lived there, mostly children from aristocratic but impoverished families. The supervision was lax. The Duchess spent most of her time at court. The children were left to govern themselves, and men noticed. Catherine was perhaps 12 years old when Henry Mannix, her music teacher, began touching her. He was an adult. She was a child. He later testified that their encounters involved kissing and touching, but stopped short of intercourse. When the Dowager Duchess caught them embracing, she struck Catherine. Not Mannix. Catherine. The girl who had been groomed. The child who should have been protected. Years later, during the interrogations, Mannix would describe these encounters as if Catherine had been a willing participant, as if a 12-year-old girl could consent to an adult man in a position of authority. The system was already teaching Catherine a lesson. She was responsible for the desires of men. She was to blame. She would carry that lesson to the scaffold. By the time Catherine was 14 or 15, she was involved with Francis Derham, a secretary in the Dowager Duchess's household. The relationship was consensual in the sense that both participated willingly, but Derham was an adult. Catherine was a teenager. They met in secret. They exchanged gifts. Derham later claimed they called each other husband and wife. If true, this constituted a pre-contract binding promise of marriage that, in the eyes of the church, was nearly as binding as marriage itself. Derham testified that they had sexual intercourse multiple times. Catherine's roommates knew. Servants knew. The entire household whispered. But no one protected her. No one said this was wrong. When the Dowager Duchess finally discovered them, she separated them, sending Derham to Ireland. But she did not report the relationship. She did not warn Catherine's family. She simply hoped the scandal would fade. and for a time it did. In early 1540, Catherine's uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, secured her a position at court as a maid of honour to Anne of Cleves. Catherine was thrilled. She could escape the dormitory, escape the whispers, escape the past. She had no idea she was walking into a trap far more dangerous than anything she had experienced at Lambeth. Henry VIII noticed Catherine almost immediately. She was young, vivacious, and everything Anne of Cleves was not. By June 1540, courtiers were remarking on the king's obvious attraction. Anne of Cleves herself complained. Henry's interest was not subtle. He visited Catherine constantly. He gave her lands confiscated from convicted traitors. He sent her gifts, and everyone at court understood what was happening. The king wanted a new wife. Catherine Howard would be that wife. The wedding took place on July 28, 1540, at Oatlands Palace. The same day, Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, was executed at the Tower. The symbolism was clear. The old regime was dead, the Howards were in power, and Catherine, barely 18, was now Queen of England. She adopted the motto, non autre volonté que la sienne, no other will but his. No other will but his. She had no choice but to take that motto. To survive as Henry's wife required total submission, total obedience, and even that was not enough. For the first year, Catherine seemed to thrive. She dressed beautifully, she danced, she charmed the court. Henry was besotted. The French ambassador observed that Henry cannot treat her well enough and caresses her more than he did the others. But beneath the surface, Catherine was drowning. She was isolated from her family, surrounded by spies, watched constantly, and men from her past were beginning to appear at court, demanding positions, threatening to reveal what they knew. She hired them. She gave them money. She tried to buy their silence. But silence, once broken, cannot be purchased back. In summer 1541, the court went on progress a royal tour through the northern counties. It was during this progress that Catherine began meeting in secret with Thomas Culpeper, one of Henry's most trusted gentlemen of the Privy Chamber. The meetings were arranged by Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, Catherine's lady-in-waiting, and the widow of George Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's executed brother. Why did Catherine do it? Was it love? Recklessness? A desperate attempt to feel something other than suffocated? The truth is more complex. Thomas Culpeper was not a romantic hero. He was a man who had previously been pardoned for rape, a man who understood power and how to wield it. Some historians believe he was blackmailing Catherine, exploiting her past to coerce her into the meetings. Others believe Catherine genuinely cared for him, a remnant of an earlier, brief romance before her marriage. What is certain is this: the meetings were witnessed. Servants saw, guards saw, and in November 1541, one of those witnesses decided to speak. His name was John Lascelles. He was a Protestant reformer who despised the Catholic Howard family. His sister Mary Lascelles had lived with Catherine at Lambeth and knew about her relationship with Derham. Lascelles approached Archbishop Thomas Cranmer with the information. Cranmer, a political enemy of the Howards, saw an opportunity to destroy them. He wrote down the allegations and handed them to Henry on November 2nd, 1541, during a mass for the dead. Henry did not believe it at first. He ordered an investigation, but as witness after witness came forward, as letters were discovered, as the interrogations intensified, the truth became undeniable. Catherine had lied about her sexual history. She had met secretly with Culpeper. And under Tudor law, both were treason. The interrogations began in earnest. Catherine was confined to her apartments at Hampton Court. Guards were posted at every door. Her jewels were taken. Her gowns were inventoried. Her household was dismissed. She was alone. The men conducting the investigation were ruthless. Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury; Richard Rich, a lawyer known for his willingness to extract confessions by any means; Thomas Reardersley, a counsellor loyal to Henry. They questioned Catherine for hours. They threatened her. They promised mercy if she confessed. They told her that her only hope was to tell the truth. But there was no mercy. Telling the truth meant admitting treason. Refusing to speak meant torture. Catherine broke. She confessed to the relationship with Derham. She admitted the meetings with Culpeper. She begged for the king's forgiveness. She wrote letters pleading for her life. Henry never responded. He never saw her again. While Catherine was being interrogated at Hampton Court, Francis Derham and Thomas Culpeper were arrested and taken to the Tower. They were tortured. Derham confessed that he and Catherine had been pre-contracted to marry, which would have made her marriage to Henry invalid. Culpeper insisted the relationship with Catherine had been innocent, but a letter in Catherine's handwriting was discovered among his possessions. The letter was intimate. It ended with the line, "I never longed so much for a thing as I do to see you and speak with you." On December 1, 1541, Derham and Culpeper were tried and convicted of high treason. On December 10, they were executed at Tyburn. Culpeper, because of his status as a gentleman, was beheaded. Derham, considered a commoner, was hanged, drawn and quartered. His body was butchered in front of a crowd. His head was placed on a spike on London Bridge. Culpeper's head joined it, and Catherine, still confined at Hampton Court, knew what was coming. She could see her future in those severed heads. But the worst was yet to come. On January 21st, 1542, Parliament introduced a Bill of Attainder against Catherine Howard and Lady Rochford. A Bill of Attainder was a legislative act declaring someone guilty of a crime without a trial. It was a legal shortcut, a way to execute someone without the inconvenience of evidence or defense. The bill declared that Catherine had failed to disclose her sexual history to the king before their marriage. It declared that she had committed adultery with Culpeper. It made both offences punishable by death. The bill was retroactive. It made Catherine guilty of crimes that were not crimes when she committed them. It was passed on February 7, 1542. Catherine was not allowed to defend herself. She was not given a trial. She was simply told she would die. She was given 3 days. On February 10, 1542, Catherine was taken from Sion Abbey, where she had been held, to the Tower of London. Eustace Chapuys, the imperial ambassador, described the scene. Catherine resisted. She cried. She had to be physically manhandled onto the barge. As the boat passed under London Bridge, she would have seen the heads of Derham and Culpeper, still impaled on spikes, rotting in the open air. Those men had known her, had touched her, had claimed to love her. Now they were evidence of what happened to people who crossed Henry VIII. The barge docked at the Traitors' Gate. Catherine was led through the same entrance her cousin, Anne Boleyn, had entered 6 years earlier. She was taken to a cell. The door was locked, and she was told she would die in 3 days. On Sunday, February 12, 1542, at around 7 in the evening, Catherine was visited by officials who informed her she would be executed the following morning at 7. She had 12 hours to prepare. Most condemned prisoners spent their final night in prayer, writing farewell letters, or confessing their sins to a priest. Catherine did something different. She asked for the executioner's block to be brought to her cell. Her request was granted. Chapuys recorded the moment. That evening, she asked to have the block brought in to her, that she might know how to place herself, which was done, and she made trial of it. For hours, Catherine knelt in her cell, practicing. She positioned her neck. She adjusted her posture. She rehearsed the moment of her death over and over. Why? Was she trying to make the experience less terrifying? Was she determined to die with dignity, to prove she was still a queen even in her final moments? Or was she so traumatized, so broken by months of interrogation and isolation, that rehearsing her execution was the only way she could exert any control over what was about to happen to her? We will never know. What we do know is this: an 18-year-old girl spent her final night alive practicing how to die. No one stopped her. No one comforted her. The block sat in the center of her cell, cold, heavy, wooden, stained with the blood of others who had knelt before it. And Catherine laid her head in it again and again, perfecting her final performance. Because in Tudor England, even death was a performance, and she was expected to do it well. At 7 in the morning on February 13, 1542, members of the King's Council arrived at the Tower. The Duke of Norfolk, Catherine's uncle, was notably absent. He had already distanced himself from his niece, writing a grovelling letter to Henry in which he blamed Catherine entirely for the scandal. The Duke of Suffolk was also absent, but others were there, councillors, lords, foreign ambassadors, all there to witness. Catherine was escorted from her cell to Tower Green, the same spot where Anne Boleyn had been executed. She was dressed in black velvet. Eyewitnesses reported that she was so weak she could barely stand. She had to be assisted onto the scaffold. Charles de Marillac, the French ambassador, wrote, "The Queen was so weak that she could hardly speak. But she did speak. She gave a brief speech, following the conventions expected of condemned traitors. She confessed she had offended the king. She said she deserved to die 1,000 deaths. She asked for mercy for her family and prayers for her soul." There is a legend that Catherine's final words were, "I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper." But no contemporary source records this. Chapois and other eyewitnesses report that Catherine spoke very little and stuck to the traditional formula. The romantic declaration is likely a later invention, a way to give her story a tragic love narrative. The truth is simpler and more brutal. Catherine said what she was expected to say. She knelt at the block, exactly as she had practiced through the night, and the executioner severed her head with a single blow. Lady Rochford followed. She knelt in Catherine's blood and was beheaded in the same spot. Their bodies were wrapped in black cloth and carried to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where Anne Boleyn was already buried. No grave markers were placed. No memorials erected. Catherine Howard's body was not identified during Victorian restorations of the chapel. She remains buried somewhere beneath the floor, unmarked and unnamed. Henry VIII did not attend the execution. He remained at Whitehall Palace. According to Chapois, within 3 days of Catherine's death, Henry was hosting feasts and entertaining ladies at court, without showing particular affection to anyone. By May 1543, just 15 months after Catherine's execution, Henry married his sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr. Catherine Howard's name was erased. Her portraits, if any existed, were likely destroyed. No authenticated image of her survives. What remains are court records, witness testimonies, legal documents describing her crimes, and the chilling accounts of a girl who spent her last night alive rehearsing her own death. Catherine Howard was a child when she was exploited by Henry Manox, a teenager when she became involved with Francis Derham, barely 18 when she was married to a man more than 30 years her senior, who could have her killed on a whim. She was never given a chance. The adults who should have protected her father, the Dowager Duchess, her uncle, used her as a pawn. The men who claimed to love her, Derham, Culpeper, exploited her, and the system that condemned her gave her no trial, no defense, no voice. The law that executed Catherine Howard was created specifically for her. The Royal Assent by Commission Act of 1541 made it treason for a queen to fail to disclose her sexual history to the king within 20 days of marriage. It was passed after Catherine's past was discovered. It was retroactive. It was designed to ensure she had no legal defense. Parliament wanted her dead. Henry wanted her erased, and the law made it easy. This was not justice. This was political murder, dressed in legal language. Catherine Howard's story is not a love story. It is not a cautionary tale about foolish young women. It is a story about a system that destroys the people it claims to protect. A system that blamed a child for being groomed, that blamed a teenager for the desires of adult men, that blamed a young queen for crimes that were not crimes when she committed them. But Catherine Howard did one thing they could not take from her. She practiced, she prepared, she faced the scaffold with as much dignity as she could summon, and in her final moments she proved she was more than the men who condemned her ever understood. She was not a rose without a thorn. She was a girl who survived abuse, manipulation, and a legal system designed to destroy her. And when they came for her head, she made sure she died well. Catherine Howard's name appears in court records, tax documents, and witness testimonies. Just her name, her crimes, her execution. No mention of what she endured, no testimony of what she felt. But she was real. She lived. She survived. And like thousands of others, she was silenced by a system that treated her body as evidence and her consent as irrelevant. The laws are gone now. The rituals are museum curiosities. The Tower of London is a tourist attraction, but the women who endured these nights deserve more than plaques. They deserve to be remembered, not as property that was transferred, not as queens who were executed, but as people who survived. Catherine's story is not over. There are more hidden histories waiting to be uncovered. If this moved you, tell me in the comments. If you want more stories that history tried to erase, subscribe, because their silence ends here.